Hey guys, welcome back to our series of videos on modern India. So today we're going to pick up pretty much where we left off in talking about the aftermath of the Sepoy Rebellion, or the Great Indian Mutiny of 1857. So really when the British took over in India after that, and thereby expelling the British East India Company, um, the British government saw India as the crown jewel for their empire, the kind of the main element of their power in Asia. Yes, they had influence, they had um, control of other parts of Asia, even parts of Africa, but India held the most promise. Um, but it's not just focusing on what was good for Britain and what was bad for Britain, but we'll look at India as well. So we see with India, it's not all good. Yes, the power and the might of the British Empire brought a lot of good, but there were some bad, some negatives to their control. So we see that with the British control in India, it really restricted Indian industry, where the British forced Indians to buy British-produced goods, which meant that the price was higher. First of all, and then second, that it really kind of disrupted Indian industry. Yes, they didn't have modern factories to the extent that major British cities did, but they had a thriving industry, thriving manufacturing sector of their economy. So now the fact that it is being pushed further back kind of restricts their growth. That really impacts them moving forward into the 20th century. And also really with their agriculture, that instead of growing crops that they would consume, whether by eating or by using on their own goods, the British were forcing them to grow cash crops. And that really disrupted the soil, disrupted their agricultural industry. So that kind of put the famines that occurred in the later 1800s into sharp contrast to the growth and the prosperity of the first half of the 1800s, 19th century. And again, that kind of put them at a further step back, moving into the 20th century. But ultimately, for the British, it's about political control. The Indians did not have authority over their own government, what they could or couldn't do. But it's not all bad. We see that the might and power of British Empire allowed for the development of improved railroad system, better infrastructure, roads, bridges, communication through phone lines was greatly improved with the advent or the takeover by the British Empire. And we see something that India continues to struggle with today is sanitation and public health. So it's an issue of getting what countries in the Western world might consider basic human functions, with running water. It's not as easy of a problem to solve in these more rural parts of India. Not just India, but other nations around the world. The rural nations rural parts of nations around the world. But in particular, with the size and the population density of India, it becomes an even bigger problem as we move forward. And we also see an improvement in education and literacy, where with the British system, more and more students, more and more children are going to school. Gandhi, for example, is a product of that schooling system brought on by the British. And I know it's I put this in quotes, but I think no more local warfare. The fighting was not as intense among local groups because of the British Empire, which British military was trying to force them into some kind of passive agreements between each other. And just kind of see the outcome of some of the famines in late 19th century India. Also, we see these kind of shanty towns that developed surrounding major cities. So this is more of a modern photo, but still you get the idea of the extreme poverty that exists. And I know this is going on, 6 years old right now. But you still just look at the predictions. Look at the growth of India from the 7th largest economy as of 2015 to the 3rd largest economy as of 2030. So it's a huge, huge jump for them. And so we're talking about these trains. Yes, that's a train underneath all of those people. And it's just the strain of their population, the size of the density of their population on their transportation system cannot be misquoted or misstated. This is, I don't want to say a common sight, but something that many people in India would not be surprised if they had seen, if they saw. All right, now just moving forward into the idea of nationalism and towards that independence movement. We see that India, or Indians, native Indians, formed the Indian National Congress, or the INC, in 1885. So I'll say just under 30 years after the British took control, and with the really sole purpose of seeking independence. And being a majority Hindu supported group, it did create some problems for the Muslim population in India. So the Muslims in India ended up forming their own group known as the Muslim League in 1906, so just about 20 years after that, or after the INC was formed. And a lot of this split over the differences of really who would control India afterwards, what kind of division of power would exist, because even though Hindus were the vast majority of the population, Muslims were not really willing to just give up everything just for freedom or just to kick out the British. But really, when it came down to it, both those groups, despite their differences in religion, did really work together towards independence in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. But the British were very duplicitous in the fact that they were promising, yes, we're going to leave, we're going to give you some freedom, and they were doing it piecemeal, bit by bit. And then World War I comes along, and they promise them even more. They're like, all right, if you guys fight for us, we will give you freedom. We'll give you more freedom. And that's how the British get the India to fight for them in World War I. They say, all right, if you fight for us, in exchange for that, you're going to get governance and independence. So you're going to be able to rule yourself eventually after the war is fought and after we win. But the British didn't follow through. They didn't give them independence, and that pissed off and angered a lot of Indians. Many members of these groups, the INC or the Muslim League, were irate after the British refused, in the aftermath of World War I, to give them independence, because they had fought and died for the British Empire. Like I said, and it was very, that anger turned to violence, and a lot of rioting took place in the year after the end of World War I, and we see the British trying to quell that violence with the Rowlatt Acts in April of 1919, where they're essentially saying, right, if you're caught protesting, you're caught resisting the British Empire, you're going to be jailed without a trial for a minimum of 2 years. So basically, for 2 years, you would not be seen or heard from by your family, anyone. So that was a huge kind of threat for the British Empire to jail anyone that was thinking or attempting to resist. And that led directly to the Amritsar Massacre in Jallianwala Bagh, also known as the Jallianwala Massacre, because it happens in the city of Amritsar, which, if we remember when we're talking about Sikhs, it's a major Sikh city with the Golden Temple. But Jallianwala was a kind of an open square, not quite a market, but just an open square meeting area. And at the time, the British had outlawed or prevented these mass groups from forming and meeting and interacting. But on the 13th of April in 1919, a large group had formed in this open square area, and they were rightly so angry about the Rowlatt Acts. And this particular group had been peaceful. They were just listening to speeches. They were just listening to people talk. It's not like they were drumming up violence or hurting people, killing people. And that crowd is there, like I said, peacefully, fasting, praying, listening to these speeches. But the British don't see it as that. They see it as a direct threat against their power, their authority. So they send in a contingent of British troops, British and Indian troops, Sepoys, or the equivalent of Sepoys, under the direction of Brigadier General Reginald Dyer. He's kind of I don't want to say an evil man, but we'll see why. So the British send in their troops under Dyer to disperse this crowd. And you can see here in the images right here, British troops here, the crowd over here. So it's, again, a peaceful crowd, but Dyer decides, in order to send a message, that he's going to fire into the crowd. So a crowd of men, women, children, the young and the old, are shot in cold blood to send a message. And this is something that really pushes the nationalist movement to the brink, where now we see the explosion of popularity, because now more and more people are seeing the brutality of the British Empire. Alright, so we see here with this is a well that was in the center. Can we see it? Yeah, you see it here in the lower part of the screen. All these people, they're diving into the well to avoid the British fire. People were drowning, bodies were being crushed. They were pulling bodies out of this well in the aftermath. These are buildings on the outskirts of Jallianwala. Bullet holes, still there, just about a century later. See, this is just a picture taken in the aftermath, but it's this open air space. So watch, you guys, I'm not going to play this clip, but you guys can watch this. This is from the movie Gandhi, Ben Kingsley's Gandhi video on the Amritsar Massacre. So for Dyer, the massacre wasn't a good thing for his career. While some would end up praising him for his actions, there were many, including what we see here, the Hunter Commission, and eventually the Secretary of War, the War Secretary Churchill, and the Prime Minister would eventually condemn his actions and punish him in some way, and essentially forcing him into retirement, where he is no longer a member of the British military. But despite that kind of indignation, many people still saw his actions as heroic, as kind of preventing further bloodshed. So thank you guys. See you guys later.